the report, Bridging the Gap, Mapping Gender Availability in Asia and the Pacific. Before we start, just a few small housekeeping matters as usual. If you could kindly keep yourselves on mute if you're not talking to prevent any background noise or disturbances. And also, we would ask to save on bandwidth for everyone and to prevent confusion if you're not speaking, and also to please keep your video off unless you're one of the panelists. I'm very pleased to say that we have an excellent lineup of panelists and presenters. And since we actually only have an hour and much material to cover, I think we can begin with no further ado. To kick off, our first speaker is Miss Emily Curry-Pryor, who is Executive Director of Data2X, an organization which aims to improve the availability, quality, and use of gender data. She's going to deliver pre-recorded opening remarks, and I'll ask my colleague, Pinita, if she could please run the video.
Hello, everyone. I'm Emily Curry-Pryor, Executive Director of Data2X, a civil society organization that works every day to build the case and mobilize action for gender data through research, advocacy, communications, and partnerships. My regrets that I cannot be with you live today, but I want to thank the ESCAP team for inviting me to speak with you. The last 18 months have been remarkable. In every country, COVID-19 has tested our systems, our empathy, and our resolve. In addition to the disproportionate impact, social, economic, and otherwise, that this pandemic has had on women and girls, COVID-19 has also undermined efforts to increase the already limited gender data available needed to monitor the Sustainable Development Goals. As you all know, there are 53 gender-specific indicators across the SDGs, and even before the pandemic, most countries did not have enough data available to monitor their progress. For example, roughly 3/4 of the data on these indicators is more than a decade old, and 60% of countries don't have data available to measure progress against SDG 5. Part of the problem is, simply put, that we need more funding for gender data. In our recent State of Gender Data Financing report, Data2X and Open Data Watch estimated that we face a funding gap of $450 million per year for core gender data systems. And since the onset of the pandemic, most statistics offices in low and lower middle income countries have reported a reduced ability to meet international reporting requirements. And more than half of national statistics offices have experienced budget cuts, hampering their effectiveness. All this while also having even more demands placed upon them during the pandemic. There are also unique regional gaps and challenges. Since 2014, Data2X has worked to define and illuminate gender data gaps across all development domains globally. And in the last few years, we launched a partnership with Open Data Watch to estimate and give more attention to regional gender data gaps. Our Bridging the Gap report series looks at the availability of important gender indicators in 15 sub-Saharan African countries, 5 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, and most recently in 5 countries in Asia and the Pacific. In each region, we undertook the report in partnership with key experts, and we are delighted to have partnered with ESCAP in Asia and the Pacific. Data2X strongly believes that filling global and region-specific gaps will take collective action and a willingness to use different tools and form new kinds of partnerships to overcome gender data challenges. But we don't want to just publish reports with no action steps. And so alongside the Bridging the Gap series, Data2X began working with Open Data Watch and the UN Economic Commission for Africa to form the Gender Data Network. Initially formulated as a network of gender data professionals in sub-Saharan Africa, the Gender Data Network seeks to improve gender data production and better link it with demand to increase the effectiveness of communication of and about gender data, and to encourage gender data use among participating countries. This network has fostered sharing of information and best practices among countries, has raised the profile of country members, and has created a platform for understanding challenges and exploring gender data solutions. The Gender Data Network is now entering a new and exciting phase. The Partnership in Statistics for Development in the 21st Century, also known as Paris 21, is the new global secretariat, bringing to the Gender Data Network a 20-year track record of convening stakeholders and deep expertise and capacity strengthening among national statistical offices. We look forward to sharing updates about the network's planned activities, and we hope for continued partnership with ESCAP as we enter the next phase of the Gender Data Network's evolution. We must fund gender data, use gender data, and continue to advocate for gender data, not only as critical for gender equality, but also as a development solution. We cannot achieve the Sustainable Development Goals or a more just and prosperous world for everyone if the data that we choose to collect, use, and prioritize does not include all of us. Despite the challenges the statistical community faces, we have the opportunity to accelerate and collaborate. It is our strong hope that partnerships like the Gender Data Network and gatherings like the Stats Cafe can be a catalyst to ensure we are all counted. Thank you so much for including me in this event.
Okay, and now we're going to move on to our first panelist. That's Mr. Eric Swanson of Open Data Watch. He's the co-founder and director of research at this organization, which works mainly to improve the coverage and openness of official statistics. Eric, over to you.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here. I am going to share my screen so that I can give you all a brief summary of the results of our Bridging the Gap study in Asia and the Pacific. The Bridging the Gap studies are sponsored by Data2X and carried out by Open Data Watch. Their purpose is to document the availability of gender data in national and international databases, identifying the instruments used for producing gender data, and examining the use of gender data in policies. And let me add that we are very grateful for the cooperation that we've received from the offices of national statistical agencies in carrying out the study, and of course, help from our colleagues at ESCAP. The studies are motivated by the need for more and better data about the lives and well-being of women. Everywhere there are still large data gaps. For example, in many countries we lack sex disaggregated data on food insecurity, access to financial services, or disease-specific incidence and mortality rates. And for many other indicators of women's health, education, and economic roles, the available data are more than 3 years old. The Bridging the Gap study in Asia and Pacific region examined 98 gender indicators. These are indicators of the status and welfare of women and girls, or sex disaggregated indicators that measure differences between women and men. 91 of these indicators are included in the SDGs, and 7 more were suggested by UN Women as supplements to the SDGs. For each indicator, we asked, is the indicator available in official national and international databases? When was it last reported? Is it disaggregated by sex and other relevant characteristics? And does it conform to the international definition and standards for its construction? So here's the big picture. On the left is the average availability of data in the principal national databases of each country, and on the right, for comparison, international databases. On average, national databases contained a larger proportion of indicators with sex disaggregated data, and in both national and international databases, about 1/4 of the indicators lacked sex disaggregated data. In between, we see a group of indicators that could be disaggregated by sex, but were published without sex disaggregation. And now let's look at the individual country results. There were 5 countries from the Asia and Pacific region included in our study: Armenia, Bangladesh, Mongolia, Philippines, and Samoa. These countries were chosen to reflect the geographic and demographic diversity of the ESCAP region. Although they're not a representative sample, they provide many useful insights. Among the 5 countries, the Philippines have the most complete set of gender indicators available in their national databases. 3 of the 5 countries have sex disaggregated data for more than half of the indicators that we examined, whereas Samoa and Armenia have 48% and 46% of the indicators available with sex disaggregation. We examined the availability of indicators by topic. The largest group of indicators in our collection came from the health domain, and the smallest are from our indicators of women's participation in public life, what we call political participation. And this is how those results were distributed. The graph shows the number of indicators from each domain in national databases and the proportion available with sex disaggregated data. So, for example, of the 12 education indicators that we looked at, 77% had sex disaggregated data. So we were able to see differences between boys and girls, men and women, and only 10% lacked any data at all. In contrast, in the environment domain, which has a relatively small number of indicators, only 4%, essentially just one indicator, was on average available with sex disaggregated data. I probably don't need to tell you that for most purposes, old data are less useful than recent data. So we measured timeliness by the difference between the date of the most recently available data point and the study year, which was 2020. For most countries and indicators, there is a lag of 2 to 3 years before the data become available. Among the 5 countries in our study, Samoa has the least timely data. 51% of their indicators date from 2014 or earlier. And in Armenia, more than 40% of the study indicators have not been updated since 2016. In contrast, over 70% of Mongolia's indicators were updated in 2018 or even more recently. In our review, we found indicators in national databases and sometimes in international databases, including the SDG database, that differed from recommendations by international agencies or from the methodology prescribed for the SDGs. We called these indicators non-conforming. These differences can make international comparisons more difficult, but we recognize that the indicators may still provide useful information and may be more relevant in the country context than the standard indicator is. But we don't collect data just to fill up databases. What is important is how they are used. Therefore, we also looked at how gender data are being used to guide and monitor gender policies. For each country, we examined the most recently published gender policy, asking which indicators of the 98 in our study are relevant to and available for the country's gender strategy. The plans of 2 countries we found have expired, Armenia's in 2015 and Samoa's in 2020. Armenia has adopted a gender policy implementation strategy for 2019 to 2023, but we were unable to obtain a copy of it for this report. Mongolia does not have a gender policy document, but it has published an ambitious framework for gender statistics that now includes 241 indicators in 14 topical domains. In the future, we will be interested to see how these indicators are integrated into gender policies. And Bangladesh and the Philippines have current plans linked to specific policy outcomes. All of these plans would be strengthened with a more complete set of gender-relevant indicators. The main technical report includes a summary of our findings. In addition, there are individual policy reports that provide a detailed list of the indicators available to support gender policies in each country. As I said, the outputs from the study include the main technical report, a methodology report, country profiles that highlight some of the important events concerning gender data in each country, the policy reports that I just mentioned, and they're all available at the URL shown here on the screen. You'll get another chance to see that in a moment. So we hope you'll find these studies helpful in your work. And as Emily said in her introduction, we must fund gender data, we must use gender data, and we must continue to advocate for gender data as an important development solution. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion that follows.
Thank you very much, Eric. And we've also just put the links to the reports into the chat so people can also click on them directly from there.
And I'm going to try to figure out how to stop sharing my screen, which I thought by
the red leave button, there's a little box with an X.
There it is.
Thanks. Okay, we'll move on to our next panelist. That's Ms. Saranjimeg Biamba, who is Director of the Policy and Cooperation Department at the National Statistical Office of Mongolia. Ms. Biamba, over to you, please.
Yes.
Still sharing?
Yeah, sharing
okay,
my
that's fine.
screen. Can you see my screen?
We can see it, but it's in, yeah, now it's in slideshow. That's fine now.
Okay. I'm very happy to present brief about gender statistics in Mongolia. To expand gender statistics and increase their use in policy planning, at least all the statistics on individuals should be collected and presented with sex disaggregation. All variables and characteristics should be analyzed with sex as a primary and overall classification, and all the statistics should reflect gender issues. And our data sources of gender statistics are population and housing census, some sample surveys such as time use survey, social indicator survey, household socioeconomic survey, labor force survey, and so on. Also, some administrative data collected from the ministries and other government agencies. INISO very closely collaborates with the National Committee on Gender Equality, and we have a very comprehensive framework for gender statistics with 14 sets of 241 indicators with the calculation methodology. This slide presents about the data availability of SDG indicators. Currently, we produce 132 indicators out of total 247 indicators. And as we today, we produce 21 gender-related SDG indicators out of total 58 indicators relevant to the Mongolia. Currently, we are reviewing data gaps on gender statistics. As a result of this review of data collected on business statistics, income, taxes, finance, and ownership statistics, there is a need to release gender disaggregated data on these sectors, and also need to identify gender data gaps on those sectors. Further, we should work on gender-related SDG indicators that are we currently not producing. UNESCO has some progress made in improving data, gender data for policies. UNESCO approved official and administrative statistical forms to collect gender statistics, and we developed in-house data entry software to enable the collection of official statistics on gender from primary administrative units. Also, UNESCO provided some capacity building training on generating and calculating gender quality data in collaboration with the UN Women. UN Women is our key partners to produce gender statistics and calculation gender indicators and promoting use of gender statistics. UN Women and UNESCO have jointly provided training on gender statistics to a wide range of the data users in the country, from policymakers, journalists, students, as well as public civil servants across the provinces and municipalities. Also, we produced monograph on gender equality based on the results of the 2020 population and housing census and disseminated to the all types of the users free of charge. Also, we produced a report on multi-level disaggregation to meet the commitment to leave no one behind. And UNESCO also establishing a working group to provide methodological guidance to the ministries to produce gender statistics and use policy planning. Also, UNESCO carried out a survey on gender and environment in November 2019 as part of the Improving Gender Statistics project in cooperation with UN Women. UNESCO receives a certificate for most gender-friendly government agency. This was a recognition of the UNESCO's progress for producing gender statistics, use them in policy planning, and also UNESCO's gender sensitive work plan, budgeting, monitoring, and evaluation activities. This was just information. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for sharing Mongolia's experience, and thank you very much for keeping so well to time. This is a good segue into our next presenter, Ms. Sarah Dueta Valero, who is the Regional Advisor on Gender Statistics in UN Women's Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific. So Sarah, thank you for joining us so early, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Petra, and thanks to all colleagues in ESCAP and everybody who joined. Thanks for having me. Let me begin by sharing my screen so you can see my PowerPoint presentation, hopefully. Let me make this bigger. Okay, so we've heard from many different speakers about the different data gaps and what are some of the things that need to be done to fill some of these gaps. So in this presentation, I will talk about what are some of the things that UN Women's Office in Asia and the Pacific, and also some of my global colleagues are doing to fill some of these data gaps. So overall, kind of like as a background information, in UN Women, we, of course, underpin our work on gender data on the SDGs, as well as on the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. And it's interesting to compare both because sometimes the SDGs are more, they cover more areas maybe, and sometimes the Beijing Platform for Action is actually more forward-looking and covers more areas, right? So it's not an exact match, and we cover, of course, all of the areas. But when we go ahead and support countries, besides looking at those two kind of global commitments, we also look at some of their national priorities, right? So we look at things like their national development strategy, their national policy for gender equality, or SDG localization strategy, as well as thematic strategies such as the National Disaster Management Plan or the Women, Peace and Security Strategy, etc. So by looking at all those documents, we can see what are some of the national priorities and what are some of the data gaps that need to be filled. Besides the desk review, of course, we also interview different government partners. We participate to the extent possible in some of the national coordination groups on different topics to see what are some of the data gaps that need to be filled. And of course, we work very closely with civil society organizations. So let me give you an example. When we look at the SDGs, for instance, of course, there is gender indicators across all of the framework, not just on goal 5, right? But there's some SDG indicators that include a lot of, there's some SDG goals that include a lot of gender indicators, which we call gender sensitive goals, right? Such as, the more traditional areas of gender equality, on poverty, on education, on work and employment, etc. But there's some other goals that are really quite gender sparse or even gender blind. So for instance, if you look at the environmental indicators on climate change, on life on land, on water, sustainable consumption and production, some of those are completely gender blind in the sense that they don't have any gender indicators. So in UN Women, we also try to support countries not only with the production of gender indicators, but also with the production of indicators to fill gender gaps in some of these areas. So as you've heard already from Eric, of course, and from some of the other previous speakers, some of the areas where we see there is more gender data are some of the more traditionally, quote unquote, traditionally gender areas, right? Like such as violence against women or equal pay for equal work, etc. Those areas we tend to have more data in countries. While some of the other areas that are newer SDG areas, they have less data available. For instance, women's participation in unpaid care and domestic work, or women's participation in leadership positions, etc. So we are working, we spend more time perhaps working on some of these areas that don't have as much data to support countries with the production of this data. We also support countries with the production of other data that's not SDG data, but that is either a national priority or a global priority in some of these other frameworks that I mentioned earlier. So lately, we've been spending quite a bit of our time and efforts to support countries with the production of data on gender and the environment, with the production of data on digitalization and women's use of digital technologies. We're also globally developing methodology and supporting countries with the production of data of violence on politics, as well as different indicators in the area of women, peace, and security. And how do we do this? So the way that we follow kind of like a three-prong approach. we start, so for instance, depending on what the problem is, quote unquote problem in the country that's limiting the production of data. For instance, if the issue is that there's a weak policy space and there's no sufficient political will or not sufficient funds allocated to the production of gender data, then we support countries with either modifying their statistics laws, or localizing their SDG indicators in a gender-sensitive manner, or through intergovernmental work for the methodological development of methodology to produce some of this data, as well as South-South cooperation. If the challenge is more of a technical nature, like for instance, countries having limited technical capacity to produce data on some areas that are methodologically challenging, then we support by building capacity, we support by funding the production of data through surveys, for instance, time use surveys, we support time use surveys, environment surveys, violence against women surveys, etc., as well as reprocessing some of the existing data, including analyzing big data. And if the challenge is more that actually the data is there, but people aren't really using it to its full extent due to either limited awareness or insufficient dissemination or communication, or sometimes there is a disconnect between the users and the producers of data, then we support countries with training on data communications, on SDMX data exchanges, as well as by organizing user-producer dialogues. So I'll give you now some specific examples of some of the data that we have supported produce in the past year or two. So for instance, we have been doing quite a bit of work on data on gender and the environment. As you heard earlier from Eric, this is one of the areas that has the biggest data gaps. So we have now conducted gender and environment surveys in Mongolia, as you heard from the previous presentation, as well as in Bangladesh. And we're currently working to produce these surveys in Samoa and the Solomon Islands. So all this work, we can take a few steps back to a couple of years ago. Jointly with ESCAP, IUCN, and UNEP, we put together an Asia-Pacific set of indicators on gender and the environment. And from there, we've continued working to develop proper methodology to measure some of these indicators, as well as many other additional indicators. So we've worked with many different partners, including ILO, FAO, etc., to put together a model questionnaire that countries can then use either through a modular approach by attaching it to existing surveys, or as a standalone survey. And we have piloted this data collection. We are now supporting full-on national representative data collection on this topic. Similarly, in the area of time use survey, we have supported time use data collection in Bangladesh. The survey was recently finalized, as well as reprocessing of existing time use data in Afghanistan. And globally, we are leading the development of supervisory care guidelines through coordination with the global working group on time use statistics. And in the Pacific, for instance, we work very closely with SPC to create a Pacific roadmap on gender statistics to really encourage and support the collection of this data in the Pacific. We have also created a coordination group on gender statistics. And through all of this work, we've been able to identify what are some of the biggest needs in the region. So for instance, Pacific Island countries requested that we train them on the use of big data to generate gender statistics, and we have facilitated training in this area jointly with CEAP. They have also highlighted the need to produce some of the gender and environment data in the Pacific, and we're now supporting a few countries, as well as the need to generate estimates on women's participation in sustainable energy in the Pacific. And we are currently working with SPC to generate a report on this by reprocessing existing data. So these are some examples in terms of data production that we have recently supported. But as Emily said earlier in her presentation, it's also very important that we don't stop at data production and we look at data use as well. So we are also doing this. We work very closely with civil society organizations, with ministries of women, ministries of planning, etc., to make sure that the data we support producing is then used. So for instance, I'll give you a few examples. In the case of Vietnam, a few years ago, jointly with ESCAP, we supported Vietnam to identify a set of gender SDG indicators. Since then, we've been working with Vietnam to actually, reprocess existing data to generate some of these indicators and produce what is now a flagship publication in the country on gender statistics in Vietnam, which then the government uses to inform policymaking on gender-related issues. Similarly, in ASEAN, we supported data reprocessing in all of the ASEAN countries to generate a number of gender indicators that are then used by the ASEAN Secretariat to guide some of their actions. And since the pandemic began, we have also collected rapid assessment data and analyzed big data, etc. And some of this data has been used. So, for instance, in the Maldives, all rapid assessment data was used to actually modify a stimulus plan being provided for unemployed people in the context of COVID-19 to expand to informal workers, since our surveys showcase that it was women that work mostly on informal sector and are not benefiting so much from the stimulus packages in place. So maybe I'll stop here. I look forward to our conversation after this. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. That was a lot of information, and just so that our audience know, we will be sharing all the PowerPoints on our website. I'd like to move then to our final presenter, and he is Mr. Mohammed Alamgir Hossain, who is Deputy Director of and Data Management and Focal Point Officer of the SDG cell at the Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics. Mr. Alamgir, over to you, please.
Hello. Good afternoon and good morning, wherever you are. Am I audible?
You're audible and we can see your screen, but if you could just make it maybe into slideshow.
Sure. Is it okay now?
I think it's just a little slow, but yeah, now it's fine.
Thank you. Thank you for the presenter, and I have gathered a lot of information from your presentations. Now I would like to share about the initiatives and approaches we are using in Bangladesh for ensuring the filling up the gender data gap in Bangladesh. We should focus on the policies. At the background level, I am not going through all the specific points, but it should be mentioned here that the Constitution of Bangladesh guarantees the equal rights for both men and women in all spheres of state and public life. And some of the articles of our Constitution is firmly patronizing towards women's rights, especially the state shall not discriminate against any citizen on ground only the religion, race, caste, sex, or place of birth in Article 28(1), and nothing in this article shall prevent the state from making special provision of favor of women, of children, for the advancement of the any backward section of the Citizens Article 28(4). And steps shall be taken in ensure the participation of women in all spheres of national life as a fundamental principles of state policy, and that is mentioned in Article 10. Bangladesh has also signed the commitment in the CEDAW in 1984, and also endorsed the Beijing Platform Action Plan BPFA in 1995. And Bangladesh government is still already adopted different policies and legislations as strategies for protection of the women in Bangladesh, and also adopting new policy documents for monitoring the progress in this respect. And you already know that government has enacted few laws regarding to end the gender discrimination in Bangladesh and protecting the women, especially women, children, and the elderly people in Bangladesh. Bangladesh government has also enacted the National Women Policy in 2011, and which is being used as the basic document as the empowerment for the empowerment of the women. In the last 5-year plan, the women empowerment has been identified as a priority areas to confirm the empowerment of women and ending the gender discrimination in Bangladesh. In the National Social Security Strategy, it has been rightly addressed about the empowerment of the women. And you will be happy to know that in Bangladesh, Ministry of Women and Children is implementing few social safety net programs, especially focused on the vulnerable women's. If we see the situation in Bangladesh, the employment of women is very much encouraging. About 20 million of females are engaged in the different economic sectors, and the full-time worker in permanent economic establishment, the women share is about half of the total worker, and more than 40% of the total person in this permanent economic establishment in Bangladesh, according to the economic census 2030. And we are going to conduct the next economic census in 2030, and we hope the share has been increased during this time. If you see the headcount ratio of incidence of poverty observed in Bangladesh, it is about 20% of the female-headed household than that of male-headed household, that is about 25%. So for ensuring the data availability in Bangladesh, especially for the ages, whenever we started the journey, the baseline data was only for the 112 global indicators, while now we have ensured 175 global indicators baseline data in Bangladesh. So it is a tremendous progress despite the COVID situation. If we especially focus on the gender sensitized goal 5, you can see that out of 14 goal, 8 baseline data has been already confirmed, while 6 are still facing some some challenges. If you see the particular the gender indicators data available in Bangladesh, we have ensured 19 indicators data readily available, while 13 is partially available, and 21 is not available yet. You know that in Bangladesh, we are monitoring the progress of SDG is through the online platform, central online platform, that is SDG tracker system. And if it has been clearly identified in the SDG tracker system that 19 separate providers will provide for the particular gender sensitized goal 5. And if you see the goal 5 and the other gender indicators, the most of the responsibility for the gender indicators for data providing, it goes to the National Statistics Office, that is Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics. So we are facing some challenges actually to support the gender indicators. The production of desegregated data and the frequent statistics of gender data is very crucial for us, and as well as the comparability of data is a very crucial issue in Bangladesh, because we are getting data from the different sources, but using different type of methodologies and other parameters. So we are in the process to harmonize the concept definitions and methodologies according to the international standard and metadata, which should be adopted in the national statistical system. Availability of baseline gender data for setting milestone is another crucial thing for us, because currently we have ensured that the gender data for the set for the baseline data we are seeking for the milestones, though the first draft has been completed yet, and we are going to revise these milestones, especially for the SDG period, very recent time. And lack of technical and financial support is being identified one of the main challenge, the core challenge to, especially for the gender related statistics. And we have got responses from the different development partners to build our capacity in gender statistics aspect. And one of our top priority is to initiation of the modern innovative technologies, especially for the big data and other issues, to generate the gender data in the recent time, for especially monitoring the SDGs. Very recent time, in this month, we have published a remarkable publication for SDGs. That is Action Plan and Methodological Guidelines towards Data Generation and Disaggregation of Monitoring and Evaluation of SDGs. This document, about 1,000-page document, has been published by Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics, and our Honorable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina has unveiled the publications 2 weeks ago. So we are seeing these publications as the core guideline for availability of all the SDG data, including the gender indicators for the National Statistical System. If we see the data mapping with the sources, and in this document we have identified that we have identified all the indicators, what are the minimum disaggregation dimensions and categories we should follow for the data generation in Bangladesh. We have identified that either sex or either gender disaggregated data has been identified for 96 particular indicators, which is the biggest dimension considered in our data generation system in the National Statistical System. And other gender relevant dimensions have been also addressed. If you see here, the age and the ethnic group and other things have been addressed here for this particular exercise. If we see the goal 5 particularly, here you can see the in a nutshell that what are the situation in Bangladesh for the goal 5 gender data. I am going one by one. In the left side, you can see the tier classification, global tier classification of the goal 5. And in the right side, this is we are actually identifying as the local tier classification, that is known as the local indicator group. And in Bangladesh, almost 8 indicators data is being generated through our National Statistical System. So it is clearly identified that observed that in terms of the global data generation, Bangladesh is one step ahead, but still now 4 indicators is under. We need the capacity building, or we need the funding for this particular area, and we are seeking for different supports from the government and the other development partners. And 1 indicator is under process, which will be available very soon. We have also identified the frequency of the data generation. You know that all data will not be generated annually or biannually. We have identified that if we especially focus on the goal 5, 7 indicators will be generated triennially, and 3 will be annual, and 3 will be 5-yearly. These 3 are actually the policy related indicators. We have also prepared the calendar for the data reporting for the National Statistical System. For example, I have shown here the data sources for as the Ministry of Women and Children Affairs in Bangladesh. So they have clearly identified in which year and which month, at what frequency they will ensure the data reporting to the SDG tracker system, so that it can be shared with the national and global community to monitor the SDGs. So for the particular all the sources, we have prepared this data calendar for each of the indicator in SDG.
Alan, yeah, I'm so sorry, but could you kindly wrap up? We're just running out of time.
Sorry.
Thank you.
There are some specific initiatives in Bangladesh to ensure the data generation for the National Statistical System. You can see here, and hope we will share the slides later, and you can see that we have set up a separate genders data cell in BBS, Gender Statistics Cell, and they are working for the National Statistical System to compile the gender data and capacity building on the gender statistics in Bangladesh. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, a very rich presentation. Thank you for all that information. So that concludes our presentations. I'd like to move on now to our discussant, We've had a slight change in the program. Now our discussant is Ms. Chana Lindstrom, who is a social affairs officer in the Gender Equality and Social Inclusion section here at ESCAP. Chana, over to you, please, for your thoughts and reflections.
Petra, thank you very much. And thank you, everyone, for these rich perspectives from a variety of different angles. It was really wonderful to listen to both the progress, on your challenges, and the way you are all tackling many of these challenges head on in your work every day. So really, congratulations to you and thank you for the inspiration. It is, of course, extremely important in 2030, but also, as Sarah mentioned, the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action to strengthen gender-responsive national statistical systems and data collection, analysis, and use. And we heard from the countries here how we may be able to integrate a gender-responsive, responsive budgeting approach even into the national follow-up and review of the 2030 agenda and the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. And this was including strengthening national statistical capacities to design, disaggregated to the greatest extent possible by sex, by age, by income, and by other characteristics that are relevant to national context. Okay, I'm just hearing my connection's not great. I'm turning off my video then to see if we can get a better connection. So we have this drive now not only to collect disaggregated data, but also promote blended research methodologies, qualitative and quantitative approaches. There was talking about vectors and data as well in many of the points made, and I realized that we are running out of time. There was a couple of things I wanted just to mention. They are that resonated very well with me from the opening remarks by Ms. Pryor. Not only was she talking about that much of the data we have is more than a decade old, but she was also facing funding cuts at the same time. Having already, one was estimated in the region to be a funding gap of $450 million per year. So I can see the great work that is being done at the national level with UN Women in Bangladesh. We heard about a range of legislative measures, gender responsive budgeting since 2015, and then we have the new action plan at the same time. But how are we grappling is my question at national level with these persistent funding gaps, and related to that, how do we prioritize the data? I know that our colleague from Bangladesh talked about the 5 areas that were prioritized. In what ways did we arrive at these 5 areas that the board now is treating, and the additional 7 indicators that was proposed by UN Women as well? So this was one thing I wanted to raise for discussion, and see on the graphs that there were about a quarter of the data that were in fact disaggregated by sex, but it was not published as such. And I wonder whether through an analysis of these data points, what we could say about the data. Is it from country to country a variety of data, or is it always the same indicators that are published without this sex disaggregation? And is there any way that we can identify them easily to leverage the data that already exists for policies and opportunities there? And then I think I just wanted to say, running out of time, ESCAP forged a consensus of member states in the Asia Pacific region. We have a very strong consensus-based outcome empowerment of women and girls in Asia and the Pacific. And of course, data and statistics is a very strong part of this declaration. And what it is particularly saying is, going forward, the importance of leveraging the opportunities offered by innovation and technology. And it is also looking for technical and finance participants here today, whether there may be some good practices already that can be reported on how it's in the context of COVID-19. And then I just want to end my intervention here to say that at ESCAP we don't only work on gender equality and women's empowerment at a programmatic level with countries or other partners, but we also gender mainstream across the organization. So whatever work you are occupied with at ESCAP, space applications or that, of course, the statistics, the data behind that is the backbone that brings all of the actions together. And so, and to thank you for this data that you will be bringing into our work to make a difference in the lives of women and girls across the Asia Pacific region. Petra, I'm sorry if my connection was a bit wobbly. I hope you heard me, and I thank you very much for this opportunity.
Chana,
Over to you.
Thank you so much. I must say, though, that I think your connection, it was cutting in and out. Maybe we can put some of your talking points and thoughts. We can write it up and put it onto the website, so in case that others missed it too. But thank you very much. We don't have much time left, but we do have a few minutes for questions and answers. And I would ask the panelists if they could stay on, please, to answer any questions. Please feel free to write any questions into the chat. But in the meantime, we actually received a question ahead of time. And I think that this one is probably best placed to Sarah from UN Women. And the question is, what is the best way to regularly collect GBV data, gender-based violence data, when the country does not have a GBV IMS system, so a global gender-based violence information system, and how can this be done? Sarah, would you like to start? And please, any other panelists, please feel free to also speak if you're interested in answering this question.
Thank you so much, Petra. And yeah, it's a very relevant question indeed. And I don't think there's like a one-size-fits-all solution, sadly. So a lot of countries that don't have perhaps like an administrative data system that kind of tracks the data cases sufficiently, etc., choose to run periodic violence against women surveys, which are better placed anyway to capture incidents of violence and prevalence of violence more accurately. So these surveys, ideally, and to ensure, the proper periodicity, and the recommended periodicity for the survey is typically 5 years. The surveys should ideally be financed not by an external organization, but rather by the national government. And typically, we would see this as a priority either in the NSDS National Strategy for Development of Statistics, or at least in the gender, whatever, document, it has different names in different countries, but whatever it is, the gender equality strategy of the country, or even the Ministry of Planning sometimes identifies this as a priority in the National Development Strategy. So there's an actual funding stream that goes to the production of this data through prevalence surveys. So that's typically the kind of like quote unquote easier solution. But of course, in an ideal world, we would like to complement that with administrative data on cases reported to police, cases identified through hospitals, etc. So it's a bit more complex, of course, data from the judiciary system, etc. So it becomes, a much bigger kind of undertaking. But at the very basics, it would be nice to have these violence against women surveys every 5 years. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Would any of our other panelists like to jump in?
This is Eric. I think Sarah covered that extremely well, and I would like to emphasize the importance of strengthening administrative systems, and where survey data is available, of course, that can be used as a way of comparing and contrasting reports through official administrative systems with what citizens themselves are reporting, and in that way strengthen the administrative systems.
Thank you, Eric. Any of our other panelists want to intervene? Okay, I don't see any other questions. I see the ones which have already been placed in the chat have already been answered in the chat. So I think that since we've already reached 1 o'clock here, we can bring this to a close. And all that remains is for me to thank our panelists and our discussant for your presentations and your interventions. And thank you to all the participants for joining us. And look forward to taking this work further. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Petra, and everyone else.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.